Yeah. Yeah, that's really needed. Unlike a big program. You know.
And then you just be walking the streets. I know. You know, I'm just so glad you're here. I really am. Yeah.
Yeah.
You might see the. I'll let you do the well.
Is everyone down?
I can help here.
Downstairs. Yes. Here she comes.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
What do they say?
What? They see the owl. Oh, do you wanna see what's there?
No, that's not.
Right. Am I on your way?
Okay,
We're done.
I'm going to start speaking and command your respect.
Yes.
Like that?
Yes.
Love it.
No clapping necessary. Thank you
All right.
all for being here. And while we're all together, board members on, many people on Zoom, all sorts of different people on Zoom, and everyone here, just to take a moment, it was a tragic, horrible weekend. And I know so many people at Trinity did so much for the community, and it was noticed. But the message that was sent out, I don't know who wrote it, how it was created, was beautiful. I hear what happened at the theater was remarkable on Saturday night, so, we're a great family, and it was really, just an awful weekend, and I think we embraced the community as best we could, so. Anyway, sorry, Susanna, I'm away from you on that, but I wanted it to be said. So our candidate for next artistic director, Susanna, who we spent the day with, many of you have met, comes to us from Vermont, from the Weston Theater Company. Before that, she was down in a little town called New York, at the Theater for New Audiences. And has a great background, and we're delighted and appreciate that she's here. So, Susanna, it's all yours.
Thank you. I do just wanna note, I got into town on Sunday and I have one of my oldest and closest friends, as some of you have heard, is from Providence, and she wrote and said, how does it feel? And I said, it's quiet, because it always feels quiet. And I just wanna acknowledge that, whether or not you may or may not have been directly affected, but I'm sure that in a town like, in a city like Providence, you all were impacted by this. And this is, there's a real ecosystem and DNA to a place like this. So I just want to acknowledge that you are where you are, and I'm sure that you're all feeling things. So thank you for making the time today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure it's not always easy. So I am Susanna Gellert. I'm currently, as Bill said, the Executive Artistic Director at Weston Theater Company, Executive Artistic Director, which is to say I am both the artistic leader of the organization as well as the management, organizational, and finance head of the organization. So there are many of me in that one role. I've been at Weston for about 8 years. And prior to that, I was at Theater for the Audience, which is one of the larger Shakespeare theaters in the country, and the largest solely devoted to not Shakespeare, but as the artistic director Jeffrey Horowitz likes to say, Shakespeare and other contemporary authors. I was the associate producer there, so I was overseeing the artistic production of all the shows, as well as the organization's studio space, so new writing programs with emerging directors and things like that. And just one more step back I'll take, which is that prior to that, I was at Center Stage in Baltimore, where I was the artistic producer working with Kwame Kwei-Armah, the then artistic director, who was, is a really wonderful and visionary artistic leader. So those two places led me to Weston. And I'll just say that, you know, there's not a lot of geographical distance between Weston and Providence. There's a world of difference in terms of community. Weston is a town of 500 people. It is small, friends. I know people talk about Providence being small, Weston is like not like that. But the theater company is the oldest professional theater in the state. One of the oldest in the country. It's 90 years old this coming season. Wow. And pre-pandemic, we were seeing over 20,000 ticket buyers on the butt hit a seat. So a pretty substantial impact on the region that we serve. One of the things that led me to Weston is actually a part of what led me to my interest in Trinity, which is it's an organization that is woven into the fabric of its community, of its civic society, not just the town of Weston, but really the whole of southern Vermont. It's a theater that, as I somewhat macabrely like to say, if it burned down, it would really impact the fabric of the place where it is. And while I would never hope for anything to burn down, I think one of the things that I admire and that interests me about Trinity is the way that as an organization, it also, it is so important to the city, whether people are coming to the shows or not. Providence wouldn't be what it is without Trinity, and probably that's true of the state of Rhode Island. So that's a little bit by way of background. I put together a bit of a presentation. I have been saying to some of you, you know, I wish I was doing it tomorrow now that I've learned so much about you all. So, you know, bear with me still learning. But just a couple of things that I want to talk about, you know, through these two quotes. One of the things that I think about as a sort of centerpiece of my work as a director and a producer is the question of the relationship to the audience. I have a pretty deep background in working on Shakespeare, as I said, and when you're working on a Shakespeare play, really the first question you have to ask is what is the relationship to the audience? What is their role? Who are they in the space sharing this performance with us? And that question of how you build a relationship to an audience is really central to my work. At Weston, every night before a show or every matinee, I stand in front of the audience and welcome them, tell them where the fire exits are, turn off my cell phones. But I end every welcome by saying something along the lines of, we wouldn't be here without you. And that the audience's imagination comes together with the imaginations of the artists on stage to complete the work. And I've started saying it every night because I really think it is the cornerstone of theater making. Without an audience, we aren't here. And that moment of intersection and interaction with the audience is why we do what we do. So as I was thinking today, I was thinking obviously about Trinity's mission. It's not cooperating. There we go. And what, you know, and what draws me to Trinity and what I think about what you're doing that is so exciting. And it is that sort of fundamental notion, this definition that you all have of the theater as a public square. And the question of what does that mean? I got really excited by the work that you're doing across the street to expand access physically and also call it emotionally by sort of truly opening up the spaces of the building, making them more truly accessible and also more inviting, more welcoming, more ways of saying, ooh, what's going on in there? I can see it. I want to be a part of it. And for those who are in it, I want to have a porous relationship with everyone. I think that is in so many ways what I think of as being at the heart of this idea of the public square. You know, it's a place where we might go to get information or to, you know, as I've been saying, sort of to hear the town crier. But more than anything, a town square is a place, a public square is a place where you're coming together and bumping up against each other and finding ways of connecting that you might not otherwise have found. It's the farmer's market. It's, as I like to say, the impromptu dance party in the square. It's all of those ways that you're not making a plan to go out to dinner. You're encountering each other, and you might not even know who that other is that you're encountering. And that, to me, is very much it's right with my questions about what is our relationship to an audience and how are we building that relationship. Katie, let's go ahead. So I started today with this question of, you know, what might the artistic programming look like under my leadership at Trinity. I will note a couple of things in the course of this process. In terms of how I would do this in the real world, I would not be sitting alone in my house thinking of plays and then deciding on them. it would very much be an open and interactive dialogue with the people on the staff who are working together. And I like to start that process by thinking about not the plays themselves, but what are the questions we're asking? What are the stories that we might want to tell? What are the things we're hearing from our community, from our communities, from the people we encounter on the street, from the people in our neighborhoods? What is in the air around us? When I ask myself a question, I have to make a leap of faith that other people are asking that question too and want to see it figured out on stage. But having that open dialogue is really key, and the first step for me of season planning, even before titles begin. Then my next step is starting to bring titles forward and hearing about opinions and feedback and responses in different ways. So it really starts with a kind of, I like to think of it as in the same way that the rehearsal room as a director is a collaborative and open space. I think that way about season planning as well. Then we get to the next step, which is the producerial step of can we afford it and can we make enough money off of it. I will note that I gave myself the luxury of not going too far down those weeds today, partly because I do that enough in my day-to-day life. I thought let's have a little fun, but also because they're just, there are mechanisms and innards that I don't know, so I would be making a lot of guesses. Sorry, a second to advance my own slides. So I sort of thought of this as a little bit like I'm sorry, I'm not really a sports person. I don't really do sport ball. Sorry, Patriots fans. But I did imagine that this is sort of like what I imagine fantasy football is like. Like I'm gonna put together a team of plays and then like win. So can you so I put together, sort of a roster of what might be 3 seasons, sort of on the hunch of like 27, 28, maybe 26, 27. Sort of thinking about venues and spaces, but were I on the I'll just gonna say if I was on the production staff, I'd be like, yeah, no, that's so big. Okay, this is the fantasy football league. But a couple of things just to point out: the Christmas trees represent the ongoing Christmas carol. Graphic design is not my strong. But the point is that just wanted to visually demonstrate that Christmas Carol is a cornerstone of the organization. It's really funny. I think it's that funny. About Christmas Carol, I will say, I saw the production and had so much joy. And I saw it on Sunday night when people were really finding their way back together. So you could feel a sense of trepidation. You could feel an audience not quite knowing what to do, where they were. But by the end of that show, they had come together in a space. And I think that's true of Christmas Carol at every moment, but even more so in that moment. That friend I mentioned who grew up in Providence, who I was talking to, when she was a kid, she came to Christmas Carol, and then she was in Christmas Carol. And I think that sort of, that DNA of that show and how important it is, like how many people in the city have seen or been touched by that show, I think is really important. So it's not going anywhere. Also, it's beautiful, and that production was beautiful. So a couple of other things just to point out. I do propose a musical season. That's the kind of pink lavender. I started my work, as I said, as a Shakespeare artist, and then somewhat unexpectedly became a musical theater director. I'm a pretty passionate one. I love musical theater for what it does to audiences, the way it really transforms them and surprises them, and also because it is, you could debate this and we could have a year over it, but it is a very uniquely American art form. It is a form of theater that we really figured out how to do for better or for worse. So I think it's an important sort of anchor for a leading American theater to be looking at musical theater, not just as it's always been, but how we can reinvent it, how we can take some of the canonical musicals and say, what are they now? Why do they need to be here now? So I have, in the past, I've directed a production of Pippin, which is quite immersive, disco Pippin. And I put that up here because it's a real kind of like, I think of it a little bit as like a flagship for how I like to think about audiences and how I like to share space with audiences. We transform the whole theater into as my designer said, an exploded disco ball covered in Mylar. But really the audience sharing the space with the actors. And then Into the Woods and Sweet Charity, which I would hope would also have a sort of similar feeling of the audience sharing the space with the artists. I also have in the kind of blue, sort of what I think of as like American and European experiments, the shows that people maybe don't know, but that are asking us to think about theater and theater form in new and exciting ways, and that are bringing people together around language and artistic invention, acting invention. I'll just highlight on this, Utopia is a beautiful play by a Russian dissident, Mikhail Dernenkov. It's about a family living through the transition out of communism and into whatever the heck is going on there now, autocracy plus all the other things, and how the political fabric around them causes the family itself to fray, and how they find themselves transformed by the government in a sense, but not directly. It's a really beautiful exploration of how we live in a world that we can't control. So I just offer that as the kind of show that might be less familiar, but is really speaking to who we are in the world today. I think it's important to continue a tradition of doing classics. So we've got two sort of versions of classics, more recent, 20th and 21st century classics, Angels in America, All My Sons, and Raisin in the Sun, and Anna in the Tropics, and then some more deep cuts around Shakespeare. I am a Shakespeare person, and Trinity has a great reputation of doing Shakespeare, and I think that wants to continue. Two more things to talk about. All the way, these are not necessarily in programmatic order, but all the way in the far column. It is a part of your strategic plan, it is a part of what Trinity has done. I think it's very important to do a world premiere, if possible, every year. I like, as an artistic director, to make a promise like that, and then you discover where you are with new work development and if the play is ready. But I've put it here as a real marker to say that Trinity has invested in new work historically, and let's continue to bring that forward and tell stories that we are creating here at the organization. I've done this by way of proposing. I don't even know. I can't. It's quite small, but I'm gonna have to read it. Okay. So what I proposed is 3 plays by writers who are already under commission by Trinity. I do this not knowing where they are in their process. But Charisse Castro-Smith, Jackie Sibley's Drury, and Marcus Dartley. I chose those 3 honestly because they are artists whose work I know most deeply. But of course, were I to join you all here, we'd be really looking at what are the plays, where are they at in their process, and how do we best support bringing them forward to a place where they can meet our audience and bring our audience in. The last set of programming that I'll talk about is a community idea. It's a big swing idea. It's a community ensemble project. And it sounded like in some of what I was hearing today, it actually sounds like some of this is happening in some ways. But this is a big show. So I've got You Can't Take It With You by Kaufman and Hart, The Skin of Our Teeth by Wilder. I don't think you all have done recently. And it sounds like a real crowd pleaser, I know, but it's an amazing play. Fear and Misery in the Third Reich by Bertolt Brecht. It's year 3. It's year 3. So I will say about that play, despite the title, I speak German, and I was like, there's got to be a different version of this title I can find that isn't. It is a hard play, but it's a surprisingly beautifully human play that really looks at society unraveling as the Third Reich approach, and it's shocking how contemporary it feels now. But in each of these plays, I'm proposing 2 big things. One is an original score, original composition by a contemporary musician, Jacob Brand. The artist Cesar Alvarez, who, if you don't know his work for the theater or elsewhere, he's pretty amazing. And then Justin Ellington, who is a wonderful sound designer and composer. So we would ask each of those composers to write new music, including songs for these productions. And in addition, we would invite through auditions a community ensemble of all ages to join the professional acting company on stage. I did a project like this, akin to this, at Theater for a New Audience the good news is, Actors Equity totally allows it. It's a supernumerary contract. It's a really incredible way, probably not unlike Christmas Carol, of bringing your community directly into the building. 10 to 12 people who would join these projects as the ensemble, making them big shows, but also shows that are really coming from the streets of Providence. So I'm gonna pause here and just see if anybody wants, obviously at the end we'll have more time for questions, but I wanna just pause here and see if anybody has any immediate questions before we go into the next slide, even though I know you can't read this because it's quite small. Yeah.
You didn't talk about the other two plays in green. It was from,
That is from
we need to talk about those.
Yeah, so Decent, you might know, it's Paula Vogel. It's a beautiful play that Paula Vogel and Rebecca Teichman created, based on a kind of well-known lost play that was kicked off of Broadway because it featured a lesbian kiss. It's a play about the recreation, the production of that play. I don't think you've done it here at Trinity, and it's a quite stunning exploration of journeys of people who are exiled from their home and who are relying on theater to bring themselves together and to keep themselves going, including a very hard scene where they're telling the story in hiding during the Holocaust. It's quite powerful, and it's full of beautiful Yiddish klezmer music. It's a stunning show. The other, Height of the Storm by Florian Zeller, is a French play that was translated by Christopher Hampton, which is one of the most haunting explorations I've ever seen on stage of memory loss of Alzheimer's. It's part of what makes it so special is that it is looking at that experience through a theatrical lens. So it's the kind of story you could only have on the stage. It doesn't work in any other, in film or television. And a beautiful ensemble show. Those three shows, all of these are, but these three shows in particular are really tight ensemble shows. Other questions?
Is that Nana in the Tropics?
Yeah, and Nilo Cruz and then the Tropics, which I put here, if you don't know that play, a beautiful play about a young woman and her family, Cuban immigrants from Miami. It won the Pulitzer Prize, I think it was in 1999, 2000, I can't quite remember. Wait, who knew it? You did?
It's a big deal.
Yeah, 2001, did you say?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but around that.
Around there.
Yeah, and it is a play like Angels in America that is an American contemporary classic. It's somewhat recent, but it will, audiences today will see it as a classic because it is one of those plays that just goes deep into the past and into the future. Other questions? Slide, and I just want to talk a little bit about the resident company in relationship to this season idea. So one of, I sort of was thinking about what is special about a resident company. Some of you have heard me talk about the fact that I strongly believe that Trinity Rep is special for sustaining and maintaining a resident company, which is the foundation of American Regional Theater. It was why American Regional Theater was created. And many theaters jettisoned their companies, and that Trinity Rep has kept it going, I think is really important. And I know that there are questions about how that looks, but what I found myself thinking about was that what a theater does is starts by building a home for artists, which by extension means audiences. But it's the artists who create the artistic home for the audience. It's the artists, and I don't just mean actors, I do mean all theater makers and theater artists. But what we make is what brings people in to feel at home there themselves. So, I don't have a resident company in Weston, but I have a group of actors who live in town and who in many ways function as a resident company. And it's been really quite joyful for me to think about programming and where those actors and choreographers and designers fit in our seasons and how to bring them in and bring them on board. So that's one of the ways I would start, is talking with the resident company about the stories that they are thinking about, talking with the resident company about what Providence, what our community is talking about, and what, I don't like the word need, but what our community is looking to come to Trinity for, and engaging them in that process. I think one of the great benefits of a resident company is that when your audience knows who's behind the work and who's on stage with the work, they will always feel more connected and invested. I talked about the grocery store, and I think it is really important and really special when an audience can run into the people they just encountered the night before in the grocery store. I think it's hard. It can sometimes be unpleasant. But it is really powerful, and it's especially powerful for the audiences. I think it's an important step towards bringing people in the doors of the theater. I'll just say that, when I was thinking about sort of what is an aspirational goal for the resident company, and I guess I'm not actually sure why it's not happening now, but it should be that shows are announced. It wants to be that shows are announced with the announcement of who the resident company members are that are going to be involved. Steppenwolf does this, that you're seeing not just the title, but the artists. I think a goal for Trinity and a goal for many theaters wants to be that you want people coming to see the shows and the art, not the titles. They can come to Utopia even though they haven't heard about it because they want to hear what's going on. Great, let's go ahead. Another way I thought about this is, I have a kind of family of artists who are a part of, you might call my artistic community or company now, and I just want to bring some of those folks forward. This is a long list of names. I'm going to just highlight a couple of them, and then, of course, if anybody has any questions, I conveniently made it really small again, so you can. So graphic design, not me. But just to name a few, I mentioned Cesar Alvarez, who is this incredible composer. They also do some writing of musicals and musical theater in a very experimental vein. Cesar, I would call a sort of a second cousin. We're not in each other's pockets, but we're, but their work is really important to me and just really stunning. Chloe Johnston is the artist I mentioned who grew up in Providence. Chloe is a really beautiful playwright and teacher who's writing plays that are looking at the intersection of technology and performance, particularly around AI, actually. So really interesting writer. Some directors who I like to call coming directors, emerging sort of sounds like Stranger Things. Dulce Megumi Nakamura, who's an artist who I've had a relationship with for now almost 8 years. They started as a young company actor at Weston, one of the BFA actors who was with us, and then acted in a number of my shows and are now a director with the company. They are just a very special artist who has, that sort of wonderful mix of incredible sense of humor and great skill. So that's someone I would mention. In the directors who are here, who have, the arrived directors, I'll just bring forward Tamala Woodard, who I teach with at Yale, just a stunning, exceptional artist who, one of the great minds of American theater. I'm lucky enough to call Tamala a friend. And Mike Donahue, who is a really enlivening and daring artist who is wonderful at bringing audiences new ways of seeing things and doing it in ways that are incredibly welcoming and fun and playful. And I think that's a lot of what we want to be about, is how we're experiencing things in new ways and having fun while we're doing it, especially these days. And then I'll single out the other artist category. I just want to bring forward David Bonanno and Felicity Stuyvesant, who are two of the artists I mentioned, who I discovered at Weston. I sometimes call them like the gift that Weston gave me. David is a marvelous actor. Felicity is a choreographer. I started working with them because they had a history with the company and were a part of its DNA, so I wanted to get to know them. And I since have discovered that they are artists who can really challenge me, can really, when I say, what if we try this, they can say, aha, but what about? Don't always agree with each other, but are really excited to press each other on to the next thing. So that's just a couple of the people who I'd be thinking about. And I think one of the ways I would think about this is how we're bringing artists who might be new to Trinity into the Trinity community. So that there isn't a kind of, folks Susanna's bringing forward and the Trinity folks, but how do you really integrate new artists into a long-standing institution? So the last thing I want to talk about is this question of the public square and how to enliven the public square beyond the programming on stage. And I think a lot about the intersection of nurturing new work new audiences and new relationships. So a couple of ideas, and I as I was working on this over the past few days, I was like, I bet a lot of these things are already in the ether. So I've already sort of apologized in advance for great ideas that you already have. And it's really exciting, some of the things that you're talking about. So I talked about the community ensemble idea and bringing community artists onto the stage with us. At Weston, we do a Theater for Young Audiences tour. And I would want to look at the possibility of doing a Theater for Young Audiences program at Trinity. It might even consist of artists who have been with the company through the education program, possibly through the MFA program. But there truly is no better way of welcoming young people to the theater and their families, and of creating a spirit of gratitude with parents than putting on a play that is for the young people in your community. And these plays are almost never only satisfying to the small set. They're almost always as enjoyable to the taller amongst us. So or taller than heels. So I would really look into that. I think Trinity is doing a lot of work with young audiences. I'm not sure that it has a history of doing theater for young audience shows, but I think it's a real opportunity. And it also has the benefit of being an opportunity for continued training with some of the actors who might not yet be fully professional, but who are headed in that direction. A great opportunity for them to have these roles. The post-performance artist canteen idea is, you've already got it, it's there. You've got these two bars that are coming forward. And I think thinking about ways to have artists and audience share space after shows in particular. When I worked at Steppenwolf in my younger days, everybody would go across the street to this bar called O'Rourke's, which is sadly gone. But you would be sitting there as an audience member and the actors would be there, and there was nothing like it. Now, I recognize that for actors that might sound like a nightmare. But I do think that so it sort of sounds like a simple idea, right? Like let's go get a beer after the show, or let's go get a drink after the show, or let's go get a glass of water after the show. But I actually think if you can have those conversations and understand, like, why might we want to do that, then it's not a nightmare anymore, it's an opportunity. When I call the new play Best Feast, and my husband was like, why don't you just call the new play Feast? So it's like Feast. Why make it hard on yourself? So we talked about new work a bit, and I think that really all of that sources well before you get to the point of a world premiere on stage. The most important process around new work is the development process. I feel strongly that for the sake of not just the audience or the theater company, but for the artists themselves, as stewards of new work, we need to create opportunities to shepherd that new work through really rigorous development processes that can sometimes take years. So I've put this little tongue twister together to indicate that two things. One is how we might support artists as they create new work by having things like readings, workshops, development phases, retreats, moments where they're not asked to do anything public, but are able to be supported by the organization while they're writing. And then the feast part, the public facing component, which is not just about bringing an audience in to see the work, but bringing the audience in a participatory way, which I do define as sort of, whether breaking bread literally or not, there is something about something gathering together around, a moment of gathering, of eating, of drinking, where you can really say, hey, let's have a conversation, not to critique your work, not to even give you feedback, but to acknowledge that you made something and we were all here together. And if you do that with a project over time, I have seen it happen, that you stop having an audience who says, did I like it? Was it good? And they start being able to say, was it worth the doing? How was I engaged in it? They don't have to like it anymore. They say, I was a part of seeing that really come to life. So I think it's a deep opportunity. And then last is dance party in the alley, which is sort of, holds a lot of things, but I do think that there's something, you're creating this great public space. It's gonna have this open feel. I tell the story about a time when I was in France walking through a public square, somebody put out a boom box. Wasn't even that long ago, but it was a boom box. And people just started dancing, people who knew each other and who didn't know each other, people who were good dancers and not. So that's one example of the kind of thing that might transform the space into a public square, a public gathering space, dances. Bringing food trucks, which I know you've talked about, and having like picnic opportunities. Doing a thing where you might have speakers in the building and then let's all go out into the square and have a conversation about what we just heard. Just ways of activating all of the new spaces that you're creating. So, as I said, a little bit fantasy football, maybe a little bit more than fantasy football, but that's some of what I've been thinking about as been heading here today. I'll stop there, but I'm most interested in questions and thoughts and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you wanna, yeah.
I'm just pointing to people. Yes.
Hello. Michael Green, Ian His, I'm a carpenter here, this is my 5th season. I'm a big fan of stage art work, I love experimental theater, I'm wondering what you see as kind of the future of relationship to the audience and how that's shifting in the modern era.
Mm-hmm. I think in many ways, sort of in every day, it's changing a little bit. I'm perhaps it is overly optimistic of me or overly hopeful, but I don't think so. I think that we are in a moment of real opportunity where when people come to the theater to experience what it can do, the answer to the question why theater is easier to answer in some ways than it ever has been before, because there is no doubt there are studies about the ways that people are feeling more and more isolated and more hungry for that connection. So I think that there's if you can get the off the couch thing to happen and the getting away from Netflix, which is real. I mean, there are studies that are showing that is the great barrier. Once people are in the door, they're more likely to stay with you. That's at this moment in time. It might change, as we are in a very fast-paced moment. So the question is, how do you get them in the door? And that's where I think it's a really, on the one hand, it's important that we don't predict what they want or don't want, and recognize that the audiences are always as diverse as any of us in this room in all different ways. And I think a part of that is also about trusting them. One of the things I really like about Cesar's work is that, and this is sort of the theme of a lot of the artists I like, it's utterly playful, it's profoundly silly. Cesar's work, if you check it out online, it's like, they just wrote a song about an egg breaking, but it sort of comes off and you're like, what? And then you start like humming and giggling along to this rather experimental music making. I think recognizing that those possibilities are there, that something can be simultaneously experimental and really playful, are where you might start to find some surprising interactions with the audience.
John Lombardo has a question.
John has a question.
I do. Hello, Susanna. I'm John Lombardo. I'm a member of the board here at Trinity. My question is this. Let's say things work out with Trinity and you're announced as our next artistic director, and therefore you're leaving Weston after quite a few years. What's your legacy at Weston? What are they engraving on the plaque that they're going to put in the lobby in your honor? What will it say?
Be mad at me for everything. Once they get over that. It will, because of what Weston has been through, it will say, she got us through it. She kept the doors open, which is true. I think that is the fact of it. what I would want them also to write, which I think they could, if they weren't quite so surprised that we kept things going and rather well, is she got us to think new things. I think the thing that I'm most proud of at Weston, which I'm gonna own, like we do surveys of our entire audience every year, so I do have some of this feedback, but I'm sure there will be people who would disagree with me. So, but I do think that we started making work at Weston post-pandemic that really encouraged people to think about what was possible at theater in new ways and to increase their curiosity and open their willingness to be surprised. Yeah, but mostly she kept it.
Hi. Thank you very much for your thinking about new work development. What's your thinking about plays from Trinity going to Broadway?
So this is interesting because I think on the one hand, I think yes, absolutely. That is something that can happen and should happen. On the other hand, I also think let's focus on the work. Let's care about what we're making and see where it goes. Because if partly I just wouldn't want to make a promise. You know, Kimmy and I were talking about Hamilton last night. Like nobody knew what Hamilton was going to do. And also it took a long time to get there. So I think it's important that we care about new work in its own right and let its successes surprise us. Now, that said, I certainly think that structurally, organizationally, there are ways that bringing in partners who might make it easier to produce new work. I'm talking about enhancement money. I'm talking about co-productions. That could have real benefit to the operating model if it aligns with the culture of the organization. And those are some of the steps that are helpful on the path in that direction. I think, in some ways, I think more than what about getting a show to Broadway, I think, what about getting Trinity to the place where it's nationally known, where it's a place that people might even be getting on a plane to see what's happening here.
Thank you.
Hey, Susanna, would you mind talking a little bit about when you moved from theater for new audiences to Weston? Why did you do that?
Yeah, that's right.
No judgment there.
You all need to spend more time in Vermont, it's pretty great. One thing is that I was ready to lead an organization. And I knew that I wanted to lead an organization that was embedded in its community. The thing I talked about early on about have an organization that had a real role as a social organization, as a part of the social fabric, as a part of the civic structure of an area. I knew Vermont. I'm not a Vermonter, but I play one on Wednesday. That's where I wanted. And so I felt a kind of proximity to the place. I also felt a real investment in the place as an idea of like, where better to ask what is the value of theater than in a tight-knit, relatively small community. I knew it was going to be hard, but it felt important. It felt important to be in a place where it would matter if we was here.
Jill, I'm from the MFA program, 24th season. In this age where we have really good TV, access to all kinds of movies, and theater can't do what TV and movies do. What is it about theater that's going to get people in the door and make people stay? What do you see as theater as having that those things we don't have?
Yeah.
To pay $90 instead of streaming.
Right. And if it's okay, I'm actually gonna make the question a little harder. Because more than film and television, which are not live arts, you know, the question that I do ask myself when I'm awake at 3 a.m. is, people aren't having a hard time spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to see Taylor Swift. People are not having a hard time. I'm one of our supporters at Weston is the head of the NHL. They're not having a hard time going to hockey games. But like, it's not even the Super Bowl. Like, they're going to live events. So what makes it harder for theater? I think your $90 thing is a point. I do think that the question of accessibility in pricing is huge. And
Well, I think it's the less important thing. What's theater got?
well, what theater has is direct communication, is the moment, even in a show with a solidly intact fourth wall, it is not rare in theater that you feel like you are there with the actor. So I think what theater has is the actor. And I know that there, you know, I know there's some conversation about sort of the role of the actor as a kind of the heart of an organization. But I think it is important, you know, when I talk with my students, I quiz them and I say, what do you need in order to make theater? And they're directors, so they say, well, you need a visionary artist directing the show, which is just not true. What you need is an actor and someone watching them. And that is different than, because Taylor Swift is not there with us. She might be there with the front row, but she's not, I haven't seen her on it. But that likeness, that presence, and that feeling of, I think, community is really important. And I'm not talking about Broadway. I'm not. I do think that is a different thing, because that's a star system, and that's a fear of missing out system. I think a place like Trinity, it is that relationship. There's a feeling in theater when we hit it, where an individual in the audience can feel like, this was done for me, and also you, and we all found ourselves here together with something that was made specifically for us. I don't think there's another art form that does that.
Neha Garrity has a question.
So I have a question here first.
Oh, sorry, Neha.
Yeah,
You sure she'll say middle?
yeah, that's,
Uh-huh.
Vermont here.
You're
I am a carpenter. This is my second season here, and I lived in Vermont 4 years prior to moving. Obviously, Vermont and as rural Vermont as a whole, and Providence, Rhode Island are two very different places. With that in mind, how would a seasonal slate of shows here differ from a slate of shows at Weston? And is there any aspect of that that's particularly exciting to you or particularly challenging to you?
Yeah, that's great. It does remind me a little bit of one year my students asked me if there was anything I wish I could do at Weston that I couldn't do, and I just burst into laughter because it's a lot. We kind of do kind of like utopia. But I think the big difference is Weston is a summer theater. It's a very good summer theater that is working, not like summer stock, you know, doing really full processes and a lot of really strong ensemble and acting work. No shade on summer stock. But we are a theater that is geared towards entertainment, is geared towards musical theater, is geared towards the jukebox musical, is geared toward tourists. And that is very different. And it means that we have a much shorter window to build a relationship with an audience, both annually and year over year. We're just with them for fewer months of the year. And the big the big impact there is that it's much harder, therefore, to really tell a scope of story with season planning. It's more sort of one by one. In my season planning, I don't tend to do sort of the thematic season or the overarching story of a season, but I do want the plays to be in dialogue with each other. And that's a hard thing to create at a summer theater in rural Vermont. And then the other thing is that Vermont is more than predominantly white. It is, you know, depending on the day, the whitest or the second whitest state. And that's not a joke. I mean, that is true. It is predominantly white. And it has diversity, particularly in the form of economic diversity, but it's quite homogenous. And so while we have succeeded at telling diverse stories on our stage, I, as the artistic director, need to be very conscious of the predominant white gaze and the fact that it is, especially frankly for the health of the artists, it's really important that I'm not putting artists in a position where they're being looked at instead of looked with. So that limits programming. It, it means that I can do, I can do some plays, but not others, in big ways.
Do I have someone?
Neha.
Neha.
Hi,
Neha.
how you doing? Nice to meet you, Susanna. Neha Garrity, a board member here. My question, Susanna, is around how would you describe your audience persona at Weston? And you answered some of this in that previous question, but just curious as well, in your understanding of Trinity, how would you describe the audience persona here based on how you understand it?
Yeah, so Weston, as I said, it is predominantly white. It is, it has a strong sort of upper class contingent, but we have historically, and we're doing more work around broadening access to multiple economic levels. Our lowest ticket price is $25, so it's still, except for the free show. And we do have free entrance opportunities, so it's still not, it's I guess about the price of a movie. So diverse in terms of economic class, but very white. Vermont is interesting, and in some ways, and I'm, obviously still very much getting to know Trinity, but Vermont's audience is rural. But it is Vermont, which means that there is this kind of baked in DNA curiosity about that place. Like, it is a place where people might have strong opinions, but are really ready to have their opinions challenged and have discourse and conversation. I think it goes back to that New England notion of direct democracy and the fact that every March towns come together in town meeting and people really have to be with each other to figure out what the next year looks like for their community. So it does mean that our audiences they tend to skew more curious, more engaged than some other summer theaters might. I do think the big, if I were to say what's an audience I've worked with that is more proximate to Trinity and Providence's, I think Baltimore's is the more likely sort of correspondence there. Diverse in many more ways than Vermont is, certainly. And this is something we were talking about earlier, but also like neighborhood oriented communities that are, have their own identities even within the greater polis. And I think that there's some real interesting opportunity there in terms of understanding for a new artistic director, like getting to know the city, not just in the blanket, but in the particulars. So that's just the beginning of an answer, which I do think, a new artistic director will really need to spend time getting to know not just the statistical demographics of the city, but what it really feels like.
Tavon.
Hi there, Tavon Gamble, member of the acting company. I'm curious to hear a little bit about, as we see an changing industry in terms of programming, but we also see it changing with our audiences and in terms of, so people don't subscribe as much because now, especially with younger generations, we're single ticket buyers now. And where word of mouth and even social media have become more of the way a show sells or determines whether or not I want to go. What are the ideas or how do you bring in younger audience members into the theater, get them interested into the theater? And then also at the flip side, because we talk a lot about, diversifying our programming, what are the ideas you have about diversifying our audience members as well and getting them interested in going to the theater and creating new generations of audience members going to the theater?
Yeah, great. So I'm going to try to break that down into what is sort of a subscription / marketing question, a young audience's question, and a question about where programming and audiences intersect. So on the marketing / subscription, one of the big questions I would have if I arrived here is at Weston, we introduced a pick your price subscription model. It's a summer theater, so we have a much smaller subscription base than any year-round theater is going to have. But we more than doubled our subscription base through that program, demonstrably through that program, which it's an exciting program, but the real question is, what are the barriers to entry? What are the access issues that we might be taking for granted, whether it's around pricing or around eliminating friction? Subscription programs can sometimes be quite frictionful, including like complicated spreadsheets. I confess I haven't looked at Trinity's in detail, But at the end of the day, that question of how do we make it as easy as possible? It should be for subscribers, it should be the easiest thing. They should have the easiest time getting to the point of purchase. So all of those questions around access come up for me around that. In terms of the kind of marketing component and the role of social media, I hate the word influencer. I hate it. And I don't like it because it's sort of, it's just vague. It's vague. And what we're really talking about are, who are the people who are being listened to in a community? And how does a theater organization connect with them and connect with them in ways that are genuine? It is, that is at the end of the day, I think when you're talking about young people, it is about whether it's literally social media and TikTok, etc., or if it's the kind of culture of how information is shared. It is different. And one of the things we talk about at Weston all the time is that like the poster is as important as the social media post. Because the fact is that different people are seeing different things. So you have to reach out to them in all sorts of ways. And one isn't better. It's just that people get their information in lots of different ways, and they didn't used to. They used to, newspaper, television, mail. And now you have to really atomize and create lots of different campaigns. So that's sort of the marketing side. On the young audiences side, I'm gonna say this in draft, so Gen Z in the room, forgive me. I think there is something to be said for the way that younger generations are asking us to bring them on stage, to make them a part of the show. The selfie is a part of our life now. And what that means is I want to be a part of it. I want to see myself there. I want people to see that I'm here. So I have been thinking lately about what does that mean for our art form? And how do we sort of translate that sense of wanting to be a part of it into what we do on the stage, which is part of like where Disco Pippin came from. How do we kind of create a space where everybody feels like they need to be there. We need them to be there. So that's one thing. And also, I think the education programs that Trinity is engaged in are really, one of the questions is what would you change or lean into? And I was like, I don't think I would change it. I mean, there's so much great activity going on in the education and outreach program. I think the question I would ask is how do we lean into them and really learn from them and say, let's really bridge how these programs are bringing people in. And the third thing, Tavon, sorry, is in terms of diversifying audience and bringing new audiences in. I've talked about this a little bit today, but I do strongly believe that it starts with the artists. If an organization is saying, hey, come join us, and there isn't a reason for it, then it's not gonna work or it's not gonna last. But if you can build relationships with artists who are a part of the community, and the communities that might not be a part of the organization yet, that is where it starts. So that's about bringing in new artists. That's about bringing in new kinds of artists. Whether it's the choreographer, whether it's the photographer, but also asking them not just to come and deliver a thing to bring audiences, but going into relationship with them and understanding how the organization can support the art as a way of supporting the audience. And that is easier said than done. I know it's sort of easy for someone coming in and saying.
Well, thank you. This has been really terrific.
Thank you, everyone.
That's my way of saying it.
Would it be possible before we go into the next room or whatever, to put the season,
Oh, that's
proposed
slide
season
back up.
back up so that-
Yes. My husband did travel with me to Providence, so I think he's gonna join this talk a lot. I don't know.
Terrific.
Oh, he's not here yet. But just if you see a stranger, that's.
We'll know it's him.
it is,
Yeah. That's terrific.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
There's wine and cheese and chance to talk to Susanna. More cheese, you cannot have enough cheese.
I don't need cheese.
Well, then it's just perfect. And so maybe just. So then there's. I think it's